Hi, and welcome to the Muni Finance Guy podcast. I'm Mark Moses, Muni Finance Guy, and today I'd like to talk about data centers and really data centers as a bit of a case study as to the decision-making process around land use. And by the end, I hope to uh, convince you that the problem isn't the data center as such, but underlying that, it's something that your own city is doing to you right now and that it does on every development project. First, let's look at something that just happened earlier in the summer or just late spring, where a city in Southern California, Monterey Park, the council members took uh, an issue to the vote of the residents as to whether data centers should be banned. And by an 86% vote, the the citizens banned the data centers. The voters banned the data centers. And that followed a lot of intense, packed council meetings and a lot of uproar and controversy in the community. And so, and that's one form that the bans have taken. Other cities across the country have done moratoriums, have done kind of these temporary delays or movement to restrict data centers through zoning. Meanwhile, other cities are making deals with the tech companies uh, to get the data centers in their town. I know the city of San Jose was talking about revenue from data centers helping them with their structural budget deficit. So you've got this is very dynamic right now with things happening around the country. When a city gets a proposal for a land use, there's there tends to be a lot of judgment. I remember sitting in management meetings in a city I worked in, and you could tell when there was a new housing development out there uh, being proposed. You can just see the fire chief is getting ready to propose another fire station. The police chief is looking at, well, we're going to need a precinct nearby, or at least more police officers to patrol in this new area. There's suspicion around the housing because of the demand for services, and it's often characterized as housing doesn't pay its way, often because of the tax structure that's in place. And then warehouses are disparaged because they don't tend to employ a lot of people on site. So there'll be a large space taken up by a warehouse, but not a lot of jobs. You know, how that's determined, like who decides what number is proper, there's no real standard, but that's the general sense of the way warehouses are evaluated. Big boxes are just considered too vulgar. The Costco's disparaged as a big box store. Walmart is considered crass, and so and it's kind of interesting because these are the same municipal leaders who often talk about community uh, engagement, sense of community, but then they they look down upon, and I think sometimes often snobbishly look down upon the places where real people go to buy their laundry soap, to buy their affordable rotisserie chickens, and buy their home goods. And when the retail is accepted, it's often because it's a revenue source. The sales tax revenues are really what lure a lot of the retail development, even in the face of some of the antipathy towards uh, certain of these uh, retail outlets, particularly the larger ones. So what's missing from here, or what's the standard being used here to determine whether a development is good or bad? And it's the impact on the city's own budget. So it's a very city financial centric view, again, influenced by some of the angst around things that are considered, uh, you know, beneath the city to house in their town that really determines what gets approved and what doesn't get approved. And so, and part of the reason for the angst, or kind of layered into this, is that cities are addicted to growth. They do very well, or they can give the appearance of doing well, when the population's growing, when development is vibrant, because every year they're getting more money than they did the previous year. But what they really end up doing is using, kind of like using next year's paycheck to fund last year's purchase on credit. And so they lean on the growth to cover these old promises. Again, everything looks great until the music stops, so to speak, and then they panic, and then they have to reprioritize, scramble, refinance, and try to find some semblance of financial control again. And this is where cities are very poorly prepared for any kind of plateauing, any kind of leveling off of their revenue stream. And so, it really winds up being like a demographic Ponzi scheme with a master plan and public comment sessions. It just is so heavily reliant on growth. And so here come the data centers, and this doesn't really fit neatly into any of the known columns. And so that brings up an interesting kind of dynamic, because you've got a couple different perspectives here, which I would argue have the same blind spot. You've got the NIMBYs who vehemently do not want to see data centers. They'll say in their backyard, but no one's building a data center in their backyard. They don't want to see it anywhere in the city limits. And sometimes that's motivated by the environmentalism, the anti-impact kind of movement. Sometimes it's out of fear because voters are afraid of something that they don't really understand. And again, that's something we saw with cell phone towers, with nuclear power plants. People didn't think about all the benefits that these things bring, but they were afraid because they couldn't see what the cell phone towers were doing. They couldn't see what was radiating or not from the nuclear power plant. And so there was a built-in fear. So whether it's fear, whether it's anti-growth, whether it's an anti-impact environmentalism, those all converge or on a solid NIMBY kind of platform to reject these kind of centers. And then on the other side, you've got the opportunistic, crony-minded council member or group who look at the data centers as a huge source of cash, a huge source of revenue for the city to help them deal with their last set of financial challenges that have accumulated. And so in those cases, there are, they'll throw tax types of incentives at the data centers, and tax breaks. They'll make other accommodations to help mitigate some of the costs. And the pushback on this, I think, is legitimate. No one wants to see their water rates go up or their electricity rates go up because a special deal has been offered to a data center just to fill the city's bank with more funds available to spend in the general fund. And so, but what's missing from all of this, right, is nobody's asking, does the owner have a right to build? They're all looking at this from different perspectives of whether it's city financial interest, no impact, no growth policy, but nobody looks at the actual property owner's rights. And we see here in the case of where the voters in Monterey Park, California voted 86% to ban data centers, the that's portrayed as, well, that's democracy, right? This was not just a narrow vote. This is a very overwhelming vote in favor of the ban, and therefore the communities decided. But that's really just an example of the many deciding what the few may do with their land, and undercuts any semblance of property rights. And that's one of the oldest problems in politics. Um, and this time putting on a city planner's hat, declaring that the majority can steamroll over anybody's land use rights. And it's kind of interesting because there's maybe a legitimate concern about noise from an adjacent property owner, but this is not an issue of adjacent property owners having an issue with anything that might emit from the data center in terms of noise or other kind of impact on their property and their free use of their land. This is people across town saying we don't want it in our city limits. And the other thing that comes up, just to acknowledge the kind of objections to data centers, there is concern that energy rates will rise, the water rates will rise, or we won't have enough water. Those only wind up to be issues if you've restricted the growth of your water capacity. Because what it does when you have more demand on water, or I think the bigger issue is actually more demand on electricity. When you have more demand on electricity, you're able to spread your fixed costs over a wider group. And what's actually happened where these data centers have gone in is that the electricity rates have been more stable. In other words, they've grown less than in areas where data centers have not been added. And that's because, again, where you're not artificially restricting growth and making it a zero sum, they're helping spread the costs. And now these data centers are starting to come in with their own ability to generate energy, making this really a non-issue in terms of the the energy costs for people. I think the people that are fearful of the unknown here are really cutting themselves short, because what you're giving up by not supporting the data centers is you're impeding the kind of technology that you're going to benefit from immensely. Right now, you have to be wealthy to afford a tutor for your kids, uh, have research done in any kind of area, have a financial advisor or other kind of specialty advisor uh, for medical type evaluation. And what AI is giving us is, you can liken it to a combined harvester for the mind, something where anybody can have an expert at his or her fingertips with the power of AI. And I think that's part of the, I think, hesitation among some of the people who, already have their wealth or already have these resources, not all excited about it getting into ordinary hands where maybe they lose their prestige as a certain kind of advisor because now these tools are available to everyone. And so I think the people that are in uproar about this, again, because they don't understand it, are really cutting the things just that potentially will help them and their kids. To wind this down, a city should be as indifferent to whether it grows as a court of law is to how many contracts get signed. It should be focused on protecting rights, not hitting a number or maintaining a number. And when it gets caught up in being dependent on growth, it winds up in this boom bust kind of cycle. And so the cities should not have such strong opinions about types of development and the mix of development. I know a lot of the financing policies of cities lead them into that, but I think that's something that cities should rally around changing so that they can be neutral about development. And so they're not thrown out of balance when there is development, when development stops, when things plateau. Focus here for cities should be not just to tolerate data centers, not to bribe them into existence, not to ban them outright when the issues around them can be simple property right problem solving. And under the right standard, these data centers can be what a free people building their future looks like. And just the way we look back and we're not as afraid of the nuclear power plants as people were in the 60s and 70s when they didn't understand them and couldn't see what was going on. We aren't as concerned about cell towers and what they're doing and what their impact is now. So let's not stop the next cell tower, the next nuclear power plant from being built. Again, other countries, China's not stopping. Why should we if we really want to build our future properly? Thank you for listening.